Hello and welcome back to All Things Money. I'm your host, David Blain. Thank you for joining us today. If you missed the first couple segments, I invite you to head on over to our website, www.dlblain.com, and there you'll find archived copies of the show as well as a big Contact Us button up in the top. If you've got any comments or questions for me or the show, we'd love to hear from you. So we're going to continue this segment. We're talking about the IRS, the Taxpayer Advocates Report, annual report to Congress, and some of the recommendations there. We're on recommendation number 2, or actually not recommendation, but most serious problem number 2, which is that the complexity obscures the understanding of the tax code, and it creates a sense of distance between taxpayers and the government, resulting in lower rates of voluntary tax compliance. That's a long-winded way of saying, in bureaucratic speak, that because the thing is so complicated, people don't comply very well with it. If we look at the compliance rate for employees, about 99%, because your income gets reported on a W-2. You have no choice. All income that is not subject to compliance, whether you're a small business owner or an employee that earns rental income, or you inherited stock, you're supposed to keep track of your basis, the compliance rates plummet from there. And the reason that people think, a couple reasons. Number one is what they say, and this is a quote from Nina Olson from the report, no one wants to feel like a tax chump, okay? Tax chump. A tax chump would be someone that is paying more while suspecting that others are taking advantage of loopholes to pay less. And this is on both ends of the spectrum, that surveys consistently show that people think the wealthy have ways of minimizing their federal taxes that are not available to the average taxpayer. Of course, they don't understand that there are taxes imposed on those people that are not imposed on the average taxpayer. At the same token, people at the higher end of the spectrum feel like, because of things like the earned income credit, that people at the low end of the spectrum get money back for nothing. And so you have this great discontent between people, and of course people in the middle look at both ends of the spectrum and they say, you know, I'm getting it, the raw end of the deal from both ends. You know, I don't make enough to take advantage of the deductions, and I make too much not to get free money. So this leads to great discontent amongst all taxpayers that nobody is paying what they deserve. The second thing is people feel more of an affinity with their local organizations, and they really feel disconnected with the federal government. And you hear this a lot, you know, why should I send my money to Washington? And they just waste it, and, you know, Congress is dysfunctional. But when you talk, I would say, I mean, those things definitely happen at the local level as well. But, you know, when you pay your property tax, or, you know, being the number one example, and you can see, you know, your schools or the city fixing your potholes or what have you, there's much more of a connection between that local government and the taxes you pay. And so for these reasons, you've got this massive disconnect between taxpayers feeling like, you know, that sense of obligation. One of the solutions to this, which I think is great, is to give each taxpayer a receipt for what they've, you know, where their taxes went. You know, if you paid $20,000 in taxes, here's how much went to Social Security, here's what went to Medicare, here's what went to Medicaid, here's what went to defense. It's a great idea. Of course, we've seen that already. The whitehouse.gov website has a calculator on there. It used to be great. I mean, you could go on there, you could put in how much you made, it'd give you a nice receipt. It was nonpartisan. It just gave you the facts. Of course, this administration now has politicized it. And now at the end, after it tells you that, it says, you know, see how much more you're paying than millionaires or billionaires or something like that. And it just kind of ruins the thing. So there are other websites I would recommend going to, Wall Street Journal, taxfoundation.org, other places to get that information. Okay, most serious problem number 3 from the IRS, Taxpayer Advocate. The tax code is so complex, the IRS has difficulty administering it. Okay, so not only is it difficult for the individual taxpayer CPAs, tax preparers to figure it out. The IRS can't even figure it out or administer it. There's numerous surveys I'm not going to go into of people calling the IRS with the same tax question, 10, 15 times, getting 10 or 15 different answers on how to handle that. So the IRS employs about 90,000 full-time workers. About 90% of taxpayers rely on either a tax preparer or some sort of tax software, TurboTax, something like that. So only 10% of the taxpayers are out there with a piece of paper, filling in, getting the publications and reading them and filling them in. Despite that, the IRS received more than 115 million calls each of the last 2 years. But here's what's fascinating. From fiscal year 2004 to 2012, the phone calls increased from 71 million to 108 million, yet the number of calls answered declined from 36 million to 31 million. So the percentage of calls answered by some of the IRS has dropped from 87% to 68% over that period, and the average hold time jumped up to 17 minutes per person. The IRS receives more than 10 million letters from taxpayers each year responding to tax notices, and the backlog is 1,028,539 pieces of mail backlogged at the IRS waiting to respond to. So the tax code is so complicated, the IRS, they can't respond by phone, they can't respond by mail, they're completely overwhelmed, which is the most serious problem, number 3, identified by the taxpayer advocate. We'll continue with this next week. We'll talk about some of the solutions proposed by the taxpayer advocate to some of these serious problems. So for All Things Money, I'm your host, David Blain. I hope you'll join us again next week at the same time.
The proceeding was a paid program. The opinions expressed are not necessarily those of WNBU and Inner Banks Media.